The high desert always held its breath at sundown. Heat lifted off the rocks like ghosts, and the air shimmered over the sage until everything seemed half-dreamed. Caleb Mercer rode through it slow, hat brim low, the reins slack in one hand. He'd been riding all day with no reason but habit, the kind of drifting a man does when he's run out of things worth chasing. The mare's hooves clopped against dry stone, a hollow sound swallowed by distance. When he reached the bend near Cottonwood Creek, he caught sight of something moving in the shallows, a shape too small for a deer, too still for a shadow. He reined in. A woman stood knee-deep in the creek, clothes torn, hair hanging wet across her face. She froze when she saw him, the whites of her eyes sharp against her bronze skin. Her breath came quick. "Stay where you are," she said, voice steady but brittle. Caleb raised both hands from the reins. "Ain't looking for trouble, ma'am." She took a step back, water rippling around her. "They stole my dress. 3 men. They laughed." The words cut through the air like flint against stone. Caleb's jaw tightened. He swung down from the saddle and pulled off his coat. "Here," he said, setting it on a rock between them. "Take it. I'll turn around." She hesitated, then snatched the coat and slipped into it, shoulders shaken only once before she straightened. "You a soldier?" "Used to be. Now I just mend fences and lose arguments with cattle." Her mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You live near?" He nodded toward the ridge. "Cabin's 2 miles west. You're welcome to a fire if you don't mind silence." The woman studied him for a moment, deciding if he was danger in disguise. Then she nodded once. "My name is Naya Kachina." He tipped his hat. Caleb Mercer. They rode the last stretch together without another word. The desert dimmed from gold to violet. Coyotes started their thin music somewhere beyond the arroyos. By the time they reached the cabin, a squat shape tucked between juniper and rock, the stars had begun to burn through the dusk. Caleb led the mare into the corral and lit the lamp inside. The cabin smelled of dust, smoke, and coffee long boiled. He set out a blanket and an old tin cup. "You can rest here tonight. Come morning, I'll ride to town, see what can be done." She stayed near the doorway, wary. "And what do you expect in return?" He looked up from the stove. "Ma'am, I've lived alone too long to know what to do with a debt. You owe me nothing." Naya's eyes lingered on him, testing his words. Then she crossed the room and knelt beside the fire, hands extended to the warmth. Her face softened in the glow, proud still, but no longer afraid. Later, when she fell asleep by the hearth, wrapped in his blanket, Caleb sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees. The desert night stretched wide and watchful. He'd seen women in pain before, on wagon trails, in burned camps, and towns where mercy was cheap. But something in this one felt different. There was fight left in her. He didn't know then that the men who hurt her would come looking again, or that the woman sleeping behind his door would change every quiet thing he thought he knew about decency, courage, and love. He only knew that the wind had shifted. Somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rolled, low and distant. The desert was holding its breath again. Morning broke clean and sharp, a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. The land steamed lightly from last night's storm. Small pools of water shimmered in the tracks outside the cabin. Caleb Mercer stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, watching a band of wild mustangs move across the ridge. For a moment, he almost forgot there was someone inside his home. When he turned, Naya Kachina was already awake, wrapped in his old coat, standing by the hearth like she'd never slept at all. She moved quietly, eyes taking in every shelf, every worn tool. When she noticed him, she straightened, ready for another fight that didn't come. "There's coffee," he said, offering the tin mug. She shook her head. "I don't drink bitter water." He smiled a little. "That's fair. It's bitter on purpose. Keeps a man honest." For the first time, she almost smiled back. Then the air between them shifted again, not hostile, just full of things unsaid. By noon, she'd gone outside to fetch water, moving barefoot along the rocky ground like someone born of it. Caleb watched her from the corral, hammering loose boards back into place. She moved with quiet grace, but there was a restlessness in her, something wild she couldn't hide. "You aim to stay long?" he asked finally. Her shoulders stiffened. "Until I can find the ones who did this." He set the hammer down. "That's a dangerous promise." "Dangerous promises are all I have left," she said, lifting the bucket. He respected that. He'd spent years making his own. That afternoon, 2 riders came down the trail. Their laughter carried ahead of them, coarse, mean, familiar. Luke Tanner led the way, the sun flashing off the polished buttons of his vest. Jed Miller and Hank Crow followed, dust trailing behind. Caleb felt his gut tighten. "Well, if it ain't Mercer," Tanner called, reining in his horse. "Heard you been keeping some wild company." Naya froze near the well. Tanner's eyes found her, slow and mocking. "That the squaw we met up the creek? Heard she runs quick till you take her legs out from under her." Caleb's voice stayed calm, too calm. "You'll want to ride on." Tanner smiled, showing a chipped tooth. "You talk like you got something worth taking, Mercer." Caleb stepped closer, hand resting easy on his revolver. "Only thing I got worth taking is your time. Don't waste any more of it here." For a long second, no one breathed. Then Tanner spat into the dirt and pulled on his reins. "You always were a fool for lost causes." He turned his horse. The others followed, laughter fading down the trail. When the dust settled, Naya spoke, voice trembling more with anger than fear. "They were the ones." "I know. You don't owe them any more of your life." She turned on him, fierce. "You think you can stop me?" "No," he said quietly. "But I can keep you alive while you figure out how not to lose yourself to them." That silenced her. The wind carried the faint smell of rain again, distant but promising. Over the next days they worked side by side without speaking much. Naya helped mend fences, gathered wood, learned the rhythm of ranch life like she was remembering something old. She sang sometimes, soft Apache songs, words Caleb didn't know but could feel in his bones. At night, he sat by the fire, listening, never daring to ask what they meant. He noticed how she watched the land, how her eyes followed the hawks, how she always faced into the wind before speaking, as if listening first. There was strength in her silence. It started to change him, to make him listen too. One evening, as the sky burned red behind the mesas, she joined him on the porch. "You could have sent me away," she said. I nodded. "Could have. Why didn't you?"
Caleb stared out at the horizon. "Because you reminded me of someone who once told me I still had a good heart. I wanted to prove her wrong." Naya looked at him for a long moment, then said, "Maybe she wasn't wrong." He didn't answer. The wind moved between them, warm and steady. Somewhere out there, he knew Tanner was waiting to make good on his threat. But for now, the desert was quiet. And in the quiet, something fragile began to grow. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the kind of trust that comes before it.
The wind shifted again 3 days later. It came up from the south, carrying dust, the scent of mesquite smoke, and voices from the road. Caleb Mercer was fixing the barn roof when the sound reached him. Riders passing, laughing the way men laugh when they're full of whiskey and meanness. He didn't climb down. He waited until they'd gone and the dust settled before heading to the well. That's where he saw her. Naya Kachina stood rigid by the trough, holding a crumpled piece of paper. The wind tugged at the edges of her red shawl. Her eyes were hard and bright, not frightened, betrayed. "You should have told me," she said. Caleb stopped a few paces away. "Told you what?" "That you worked for them, for the Tanner Ranch." She held up the paper, a torn handbill with his name scrawled under a crude sketch. "They brag in town that you were one of them, that you ran when things turned bad." Caleb took the handbill slowly, looked at it, then back at her. "I worked there once, for Luke's father, long before the war. Didn't stay after I saw what he called justice." She folded her arms, still trembling. "And now you protect me from his son? That's your penance?" His voice roughened. "No. It's because I won't watch them hurt another soul if I can help it." She turned from him, staring at the horizon where the hills blurred in the heat. "You all think the same, that my people are less, that what happens to us don't matter. I used to think that. Then I saw a family burned out of their camp for no reason but being in the wrong place. The army called it a message. I called it murder." She looked back at him then, surprised by the rawness in his tone. "I left that day. Never put on a uniform again, never worked for a tanner since. I've been trying to build something honest from the pieces." The silence between them held steady, long enough for the wind to drop. A hawk drifted overhead, its shadow sliding across the ground between them. Finally she spoke. "Why tell me now?" "Because you asked." Her anger softened, just slightly, not enough to forgive, but enough to hear. She turned the handbill over in her hands, the paper creasing under her fingers. "My father used to say, truth is a sharp knife. If you carry it wrong, it cuts you first." Caleb gave a tired half smile. He sounds like a man worth listening to. That night they didn't speak again. Naya sat by the fire, mending an old saddle strap. Caleb whittled a piece of cedar, shaving curls that smelled sweet in the smoke. The quiet between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was cautious, like the hush before rain. When she finally looked up, she said, "I believe you left, but I don't know what to believe about the rest." He nodded. "You don't have to. Just watch what I do next." In the distance, lightning flickered over the far mesas. The air tasted of dust and change. Naya rose, walked to the doorway, and stood watching the first drops of rain fall on the parched earth. Behind her, Caleb said softly, "If you ride away tomorrow, I won't stop you." She didn't turn. "I know." But she didn't ride away. The rain lasted through dawn. By morning the creek ran full again, and the desert smelled alive. Naya came out to the porch, wet hair loose, eyes calmer.
"The land forgives faster than people," she said. "Maybe it's smarter than we are," he answered. That brought the first real smile he'd seen from her, small but true. He felt it like warmth after a long cold spell. Later that day a rider came hard from the east. Jed Miller, face pale, eyes wild. "Tanner's comin'," he shouted from the gate. "He's drunk and mean, says he's taken back what's his." Caleb's jaw clenched. He looked to Naya, who was already reaching for the rifle propped by the door. "Then we best be ready." She didn't sound afraid, and when she met his eyes there was no more doubt there, only the kind of trust born from knowing exactly how much you can lose. The storm that had started in the dust and distance was finally moving their way.
The sky that evening looked bruised, purple bleeding into rust. The wind carried that dry electric smell that always came before a fight. Caleb Mercer stood on the porch with his rifle laid across the rail, thumb working the metal clean by habit. Inside, the lamplight threw long, slow shadows. Naya Kachina moved through them, silent, steady, checking the cartridges for her revolver one by one. They didn't talk about fear. It hung in the air anyway, quiet as dust. Out past the well, a hawk circled low. Then the sound came. 3 horses at a gallop, hooves drumming hard against the dry earth. Caleb's gut told him before he even saw their shapes through the dusk. Luke Tanner, with Hank Crow and Jed Miller riding behind. He stepped down from the porch and waited, rifle loose in his hand. The riders slowed, fanning out across the yard. Tanner's grin was thin and white. "Evening, Mercer," he called. "Heard you been playing hero. Thought I'd come see what kind of woman's worth all that trouble." "You ain't got business here," Caleb said. "Everything out here's my business." Tanner's eyes found Naya's shape behind the window glow. "Ain't she a pretty thing when she's cleaned up?" The rifle came up quick, aimed square between Tanner's eyes. "Say another word, Luke, and you won't finish it." For a long second, nobody breathed. Then Hank laughed nervously. "He ain't bluffing, Luke." Tanner's grin faltered. He swung down from his saddle, swaggering forward a few steps. "You think you can scare me off with that? I own half the county. You're just a washed-up soldier with a conscience too heavy to ride straight." Caleb didn't move. "Maybe, but I can still pull a trigger before you finish blinking." Behind him, the cabin door opened. Naya stepped out, rifle in hand, shawl whipping in the wind. She came down the steps slow, her voice clear and cold. "You took my clothes, my peace, my name. You think I'll run again?" Tanner stared, thrown by her calm. "You should have stayed hidden, girl." She leveled the rifle. "I'm done hiding." For a moment, even the wind seemed to stop. Then Tanner's face twisted, a mix of rage and shame. He drew his revolver. Too fast, too wild. The shot cracked, splintering the porch beam beside her. Caleb fired once in return, kicking dust at Tanner's boots. The standoff froze there. 3 men, 2 guns raised, 1 breath away from blood. And then Jed Miller, shaken, dropped his own weapon. "I'm done, Luke," he muttered. "You gone too far." Tanner whipped toward him. "Coward." "Maybe, but I ain't dying for you." He rode off into the dark, leaving Hank pale and silent. The rain started again, soft at first,
Tanner's revolver sagged. The fight drained out of him like whiskey gone sour. He glanced at Caleb, then at Naya, who still stood tall, unflinching, the rifle steady in her hands. "You keep her, Mercer," he spat. "See how long till she turns on you." "She's not mine to keep," Caleb said. Tanner's sneer faltered. He turned his horse, muttering, "This ain't over." But the lie in it was clear. He rode off into the rising storm, Hank following like a shadow. When they were gone, the silence came back heavy. Caleb lowered his rifle, exhaled slow. Lightning flickered over the ridge, lightened the wet dust silver. Naya stepped closer. "You shouldn't have risked that." "I didn't." He nodded toward her rifle. "You did." A thin smile touched her mouth, gone almost before it appeared. The wind caught her hair, and the smell of rain moved between them, clean and sharp. Inside, they dried their weapons by the fire, not speaking for a while. The fight had left them both raw. Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee. She took hers without hesitation this time. "He'll come again?" she asked. "No," he said, "not while he remembers tonight." She stared into the fire. "Then it's finished." He shook his head. "Some things don't finish. They just fade slow till they're quiet." The rain thickened, drumming steady on the roof. Naya looked at him through the flicker of the flames. "I used to think silence meant peace. Now I think it means we still have work to do." Caleb met her eyes. "What kind of work?" She smiled faintly. "Planting things, mending fences, building something that stays." He raised his cup to her. "Then we'll start tomorrow." Outside, thunder rolled away toward the mountains. The land felt washed clean again, the kind of clean that comes after you've bled for it.
Spring came slow to the high desert. The rains that had beaten down the dust turned the arroyos green again, and for the first time in months the wind carried the smell of wild sage instead of smoke. Caleb Mercer woke with the sunrise every morning, same as before, but the cabin didn't feel empty anymore. The hush had changed from loneliness to quiet company. Naya Kachina worked beside him through the days that followed the storm. She mended fences, gathered wood, and learned the shape of the ranch, the rhythm of the land, the feel of tools that once belonged to a man's ghosts. When she smiled now, it wasn't shy, it was earned. They didn't speak often about the night Luke Tanner rode away, or about what might come after. Some wounds are better left to fade beneath work and sunlight. Still, every now and then, when Caleb's gaze drifted to the ridgeline, she'd say softly, "He won't return." And somehow he believed her. The town talked, of course. Word always found its way down the canyon trails. A man living with an Apache woman was bound to stir mouths. But the talk didn't reach them out here. The wind carried it off before it could take root. One evening, Caleb came back from mending a stretch of fence to find her kneeling near the corral, planting something small in the damp soil, a cluster of desert marigolds she'd brought down from the hills. The yellow petals caught the last of the sunlight. He leaned on the rail, watching her. "Flowers don't last long in this country," he said. "Maybe not, but they come back if you give them water and patience." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands.
He noticed how the light touched her hair, how the red shawl around her shoulders looked almost alive in the wind. "You ever think about leaving?" he asked quietly. She looked at the horizon. "Once I dreamed of going east, to the towns where nobody knows my name. Now I think I'd rather stay where the earth remembers me." He nodded slowly. "Then maybe this is home." She met his eyes. "It could be, if you let it." That night, as the sun fell behind the mesas, they sat on the porch, watching the light fade from gold to violet. The silence between them wasn't the uneasy quiet of strangers. It was the kind that comes when two people have run out of reasons not to trust each other. Caleb reached into his pocket and took out a small piece of polished turquoise he'd carried for years. "Picked this up in Santa Fe a long time ago. Never figured what to do with it." Naya turned it in her hand, the stone catching firelight. "It's smooth, like river glass." "It's been carried a long way, like me." She smiled gently, closing his fingers around it again. "Then keep it. I don't take what's already part of someone's story." He looked at her, understanding more than her words could carry. Maybe it's time the story had two names on it. The next morning they rode out early, the land washed clean by dew. The creek ran full again, glinting in the sunlight. When they reached the far pasture, she dismounted and tied a strip of red cloth to a mesquite branch, a small bright promise against the pale blue sky. "What's that for?" he asked. She smiled. "So the wind won't forget this place, or us." He nodded, tipping his hat. "Seems fair." They rode home slow, side by side, not saying much. The world around them felt wider, as if it had been waiting for this stillness all along. And somewhere in that stillness, the truth settled easy. Love wasn't a thing you found. It was a thing you built, the way you build fences or trust, a little each day, with hands that don't give up. When they reached the cabin, the sun was dropping behind the ridge, the sky burning soft gold and pink. Caleb paused at the porch steps, looking out across the valley. The wind stirred, warm and steady. He turned to her. "Guess you were right about the flowers. They're holding. They always do, if the roots run deep enough." He smiled then, small and certain. She reached up, resting a hand lightly on his chest, feeling the heartbeat beneath. "The land remembers," she said. He covered her hand with his. "So do I." They stood there as the last light faded, the desert quiet around them, the sky stretching wide and merciful overhead. Two people who had survived what the world tried to take, bound not by rescue, but by the slow, patient work of forgiveness. And when the wind moved through the valley again, it carried the sound of their laughter, soft, human, and alive, across the open land.